Hi, Sunith. Thank you so much for your time and joining us on Blitz Business. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thanks, Ashish. Thanks for inviting me. The pleasure is all mine.
Awesome. Let's get started. So, Sunith, tell us a little bit about yourself first.
Sure. I've been born and brought up in Hyderabad, and but coincidentally, Hyderabad also has a long-standing culture of being centered around wildlife. So if you speak to any true blue Hyderabadi, most of their holidays would be around going to a wildlife destination or hill stations and stuff like that. So I also had a similar childhood. So that attachment to nature and being in the woods has always been there. I also went to a school which had a very large campus, and we were only using maybe 10% of the entire campus as a school. The rest was wildly forested. So I grew up being a very nature-centered person. And obviously, being born in the 80s, you saw this whole development and liberalization of India as well. So you saw a very dramatic change happen in front of your eyes. So landscapes transformed. There was some element of, obviously, you're very proud of where the country is today, but there is that element of sadness when some threads are lost. And I always grew up thinking, why is it that we don't place any importance around that? And so this thread of can we create a use case around it where we are incentivized to preserve those threads? That has always been there. While I was working as a techie as well, my first job was at Yahoo as a software engineer, so it has nothing to do with conservation space as such. But still, I was always trying to use my skills to see if there is anything better we can do in terms of conservation. Can we build some use cases around it? I've traveled the world trying to see what is happening all around. Came across some beautiful concepts in Africa, tried replicating them in India as well. And the culmination of all these enterprises became BeForest. So that's my story and how it ties up to this day.
Wonderful, wonderful. And I see a lot of awards behind you. So these, I assume, related to.
Well, most of them are paintings, but yeah, some of them are awards. I think they're not some from my work experience, some from the one you see on top was from the government of Telangana for appreciating our work in the industry. This was, I think, 2 years ago where our landscape was showcased by the Department of Irrigation as well to see how a barren landscape can be transformed as well.
Got it. So, what was the most, Sunith, difficult project you have ever done?
I think the biggest challenge in my mind has always been, I think, the first project I worked on. It has nothing to do with what I do today, but I always refer to that as an anchor moment for myself because every time a new challenge comes up, I look back on that day and say, if I could do it then with the skills I have, then this doesn't seem too hard. And I remember that this was my first job straight out of college, and I was assigned to a team that it was called Yahoo Alerts back then. I'm not even sure if it exists today. Um, but at that point, it had about 200 million active users, and the task was to actually re-engineer it to suit this increased demand. And on my 10th or 11th day in the office, which is my second week in office, we were a very small team back then. My super boss basically called all the fresh guys out of college into one room and asked them, if you had to do this, how would you architect the whole system? And maybe it started off as just an encouraging thing to do, but it so turned out that what I had suggested, he said, okay, this sounds really good. Why don't you go and implement this? And eventually it became the Yahoo Alert system itself. So that was a very critical moment for me. Not that the task was so phenomenal. It's just that when you're looking at it from a fresh perspective, I think you approach a problem also very differently. And that was a
That's
life
true.
lesson. So every time something unsurmountable, something seemingly unsurmountable comes up, it feels very like, if that could happen, why not this? So there are those few anchor moments in life that I always lean back.
And that's amazing. That's amazing. So this is something we do. So, for example, how will you explain your business to a layman, like a 5-year-old or someone, in one line? So go for it.
5-year-old in one line. That's one big challenge again right there. But so yeah, I mean, so BeForest picks up these large landscapes and tries to make them completely self-contained. In the sense, anybody who lives there should be able to survive off the land. And that's the whole problem statement we try to solve. When we set up a community in a certain area, we start from scratch trying to see where does the water come from to this place. Now imagine if the municipality or the government is not actually supplying you. So how would you live? There is rain. How would you store that water enough to actually survive? How would you use this water to grow enough food for all these families to stay? And when doing all this, how would you make sure that you're actually taking lesser than what you're giving back to the land itself? And the moment you do that, you are able to create this. It's like a bank account. You're drawing 10 rupees but putting back 20. So you're consistently investing in that flywheel, and the ecosystem becomes more and more vibrant while you thrive as well. So that's pretty much what we are trying to do. If you look back, basic primarily optimizing on how we live our life. We are not asking people to abandon their lifestyles and live in huts in the jungle. We are saying that all these things that we do are modern lifestyles with slight adjustments can actually be very sustainable. As it is, I don't think India is very energy intensive anyway. But that's a small way in which we try to make these things happen. The entire landscape has to be self-contained. That's
And
what we're
how do
trying
you
to achieve.
and how do you identify such project? Is it from government typically which comes in, like they identify such areas, or how do you go about identifying such opportunities?
So we have nothing to do with the government. These are private projects, private land holdings. And primarily, we are trying to solve the problem of how do you protect or create thriving ecosystems in privately held landscapes. Because most of India is privately held anyways. So how do we identify it? We have parameters in the sense we say that if there is enough skill sets in the area but not opportunities. So that's one parameter. So there are typically, if you go into a 30-kilometer radius of any city, there are enough educated people, but they don't really have jobs. They have to come to the city for the job. So there are enough skill sets, but no opportunities. Then there is a ecological significance to that landscape. That is, it forms in some way a missing piece of a jigsaw puzzle. That when you put that piece in place, larger image evolves. If these two factors exist, and of course, the third factor is there is obviously economics involved. We can't just go and buy land in the middle of a city or extremely expensive land. So we sort of try to pick up pieces that are fitting inside a certain level of budget. So when these three overlap, we call it a BeForest opportunity. And we are pretty agnostic to the primeness of land. Like we don't go searching for places that are on a 4-lane highway or, close to an upcoming airport. Those traditional paradigms are not really fitting for us because, like I said, our entire idea is to see what can happen from within the land itself, reducing those external dependencies.
Understood. Understood. Got it. And so, and what are the mechanisms you sort of fund these project? I mean, or these are funded by the landowners. Like, how does the financial and economics of all of it works?
You can see in very simple terms, you can look at it as you can call us a developer for lack of a better bucket. So what we do is there will be large farm owners or landholders who are looking to sell. We go and approach them and say that we can actually create this kind of a project here. It will be very unique. Uh, then what we do is we sort of announce this idea to the world that we are planning to do this collective. Let's say if we are doing it in Hyderabad, we announce that we are doing this in Hyderabad, and we sort of seek an initial subscription to the place. We have a thumb rule where we say that if you are looking at a landscape of about 100 acres, unless 25% of it is pre-subscribed, we don't actually get into the project itself. Right? So we call that the seed community that needs to make the project happen. So in a
What is
sense, largely
pre-subscription? What
what I
does it
mean
mean?
by pre-subscription is, so today, for example, we are doing a project in Bhopal. We have not yet launched it, but the idea is around. So if you look at our website, we have announced a Bhopal collective. We have put up several Instagram posts about it. And there is plenty of interest around a BeForest project coming. Now, what we want folks to do is we broadly arrive at a price point of participation, what it means for a person to buy into this land. And when we say subscribe, we are expecting people to actually give us the money. So subscription is by cutting a check. So now when we are saying it's a 100-acre collective, unless 25 acres are pre-bought by future customers at a concept level. So at this point, we won't have like, this is where your house will be, this is how the plan unfolds and all that. Because all of that comes out of studies which again have to be fueled. So these people are essentially the early investors or early adopters. And once this community is created is when we start doing our studies of the land itself. We understand it through the seasons. How does it behave? What are the dependencies this land has? What are the critical challenges here? Give you an idea, an example of a challenge could be if you look at the Bhopal collective itself, it is a place with phenomenal amount of rainfall. It's flooded in the monsoon, but by the time summer comes, there is severe water shortage. So that's the drama that happens. So just in the span of 6 months, all the water runs off. So the challenge here is how do you stop that water and actually store it? It is not water availability itself is not a challenge. Whereas if you contrast that with say Hyderabad collective, it's the driest area in our state. So the water itself is less. So we have to super hyper optimize on everything about how we design the houses, how we grow food, what do we grow in the first place. So that sort of a thing. So the challenges are very different, very context sensitive. So when you go into a place, we need that first 6 to 7 months of understanding the place to really come up with a design for it. So
But isn't it
that's
something
how the collective
like,
unfolds.
but isn't it like there will be some projects where the land is just not viable? Like, I'm sure there must be some sort of such scenario which will be happening. Then
Very
what happens in
See, we have not come across something like that, but I can imagine, honestly. I have this theory that it's always viable. It's just a question of time. So we have seen places where we said, given 25 years, we can transform this. But obviously, when you look at marketability of a project, you have to take that no one is going to wait 25 years for something to pan out.
I mean,
So obviously, yeah,
typically a Delhi developer will take 25 year irrespective whatever he says.
but that's not what he says on day one, though, right? So,
Yeah.
yeah. See, we are at the opposite end of the spectrum where if we think we can get something done in a span of 3 years, we actually say five because we sort of tend. I'm not a developer. I come from the tech space and I understand that you too come from the same space as well, right? So there is a sense of honor in the timelines we give, and violating a timeline is pretty serious in the mind itself. So we are very ultra conservative. We don't overpromise. In fact, even when we publish, a very interesting example is even when we publish a master plan with the layouts and all of that, we actually call it only a first draft because we are very aware that let us say some new data point comes in that where we have marked as a housing zone, it's extremely ecologically fragile, then we are very happy to move it away. And we tell that upfront to people that just look at it as until your house is built, there is no guarantee that it's going to sit here because you're constantly monitoring the situation and adapting.
Got it. And so, if I understood correctly, Sunit, please rectify me. So basically, you then make that entire land sustainable, and then the developers actually come in and build the houses. Is that the case?
No, there is no third party involved. We only build the house.
Okay.
Because again, the reason for that is we did consider and debate that as well. But we finally zeroed in on making it ourselves because our houses are not, they don't exist as in silos. They plug into our larger waste management system. Their harvesting has to happen in a certain way. The power generation is a common solar pool. So all of these factors, so they plug into the larger landscape. So it's not a house by itself. So we thought, we need someone who understands all that, which is us again.
But then you are a developer, no? If you're building houses also.
Yes, I mean that's what I said. But then developer comes up with its own connotations. So we call ourselves a very farming company who has to do development as an occupational hazard as
Okay.
well.
Yeah, because I got confused a little bit. I was like, then, okay, the land becomes sustainable. Then who is building the houses?
See, the house is a very small part. Like if you look at any of our collectives, the housing footprint would be somewhere around 10%. So on a 100-acre landscape, the houses are actually occupying a 10-acre footprint.
That's it.
So it's not the mainstream. In fact, to be honest with you, the house actually came up much later in our thought process. Because we felt if people don't build their house, they're not getting attached to the land itself. So it's being seen as an investment rather than something that you buy and make and create and you're attached with it, right? So that is how the house came into our ecosystem itself.
Understood. So then what are the future plans on it? Like you guys are doing this, you want to continue this, scale this, launch something new, experiment something new. What is the future looking for you guys like?
See, we are coming up with. I always say this we thought of solving ABC, we ended up solving XYZ. And what I mean by that is, yes, the moment is the land becomes very, there's more coming in than going out. It starts thriving and different things start to happen. And the use cases morph themselves. So now what has happened, for example, if you take our first collective in Pumale, we started off trying to restore a coffee estate into a forest with coffee as one of the layers. But in that process, what has happened is the coffee that is coming out of there is becoming, by nature itself, it's coming into the specialty bracket. In fact, last year when we sent it for actual scoring of a cup, in coffee, it's rated by a cup score. We turned out to be the only Robusta coffee in the country which scored a 90 ever.
Oh, wow.
And it's not like we made it happen, right? So now the whole process then we started looking into why is it so? What has happened here that it's becoming this good? And now this year it's going to it's going to reach the world through the different chains, the Blue Tokais of the world, all the major specialty coffee guys. We also have our own line of Be Wild, which is all the produce that comes out of the collectives. So now what we see is the collectives themselves, that 100 acres or 200, 300 acres, whatever it is like a prototype of sustainability. It's a site of inspiration. And the moment this started happening, really good coffee started coming, and their neighbors are always watching, right? So everyone around us is wondering how are these guys able to make they can see us building check dams, they can see us invest in infrastructure, buy the latest equipment and all that. So they are always wondering how is this farm thriving. So we use that as an opportunity to start integrating them also into these methods, right? So
Wow.
the way forward for us is each of our collectives really is a prototype site. And it sort of has to encompass the landscape change by involving neighbors into the same methods. And that's when the entire landscape becomes sustainable.
You guys are then a farming company. I mean, I cannot then
In
think of you as developers.
Yes, we are a farming company, no doubt. That we call ourselves a farming company. In fact, we call ourselves a lifestyle company. That our full name is BeForest Lifestyle Solutions. So it's a mix of many things. I think we sort of have a resistance to being bucketed into one vertical because we are trying to reimagine life itself.
But what was the motivation for this? Like, how did you come up with this idea?
Honestly, so the previously I was into algorithmic trading. I started a company called iRidge Capital, which was into high frequency trading. Probably one of the first few in the country back then. And after 10 years of that, I decided to take a break. Uh, Me and my co-founder, both of us took a break, came to Hyderabad. We had a farm here. So we thought we'd live out our days in the farm. And that's where but the mind is such that you see certain things happening in an inefficient way, you start tinkering with it, you say, okay, let's do it differently, right?
Yeah.
Uh, what happened that was phenomenal actually because we started doing polyhouse farming in our village here near Hyderabad, and we were the first guys to do it. That I think we did it over a 1 acre piece. This was 2016 or something. But that 1 acre of polyhouse farming was running the entire farm itself. The rest of the farm was losing money, but this one was sustaining the whole farm. But what has happened in the process, though, is that over the next 2 years, there were almost 70 polyhouses in the village itself because the neighbors picked it up. They saw this happening. It's not like we promoted it, they picked it up. They started doing the same thing. And I think that's where the germ of that idea came that If we are actually, we don't need to go and profess these things. If we showcase that something is working, the Indian farmer is enterprising enough to figure it out. And if we can
But
convince him that,
uh
no, if we can
yeah, yeah,
convince
please.
him that this is viable,
Hmm.
then large scale transformation can happen.
But Sunit, this is such an interesting story. I mean, from HFT, high frequency trading, to farming, such a slow
Yeah.
lifestyle. I mean, you went as fast as possible. HFT is like you are at the thick of it, moved where things are moving in microsecond, to farming. You know what I want to touch upon this. Like, what led you to this transition? You're like, I am fed up with this. The market doesn't work the way it is supposed to be, because the boom time was 2 years, 3 years back. I mean, all
Yes.
these firms made crazy money.
Yes, yes. Yeah, I mean, we were doing quite well, honestly. So I'm actually, even after, so the, like you said, the boom time actually was 2 years ago. But I don't think there was even a morsel of, oh shit, I should have stayed back sort of a thing in my mind. Because I feel like I left when we were at our peak. And the decision to exit out was really a very conscious lifestyle choice I made. And I remember back when we started also, I had it very clear that this was a means to an end. I don't think any kid grows up thinking I'll be the biggest trader in the world or something like that, right? So it's always a means to an end. And I think I gave it a decade of my life, and the calling was always to sort of live a slow life. And I think we didn't obviously come out thinking we will start a farming company or something like that. The idea was to take a break and see what we want to do next, but something that is more like from the heart, a work of passion, that sort of a thing. And BeForest happened that way.
Mm.
But coincidentally, our first instinct actually, obviously, farming, the biggest blocker is manpower. Not just that, the moment you involve people, they have their own minds, deviation, they don't just follow it like a machine, right? A process. So our first instinct actually was to replace it with a lot of bots. Can we actually automate agriculture was the problem we took on ourselves. But then we eventually ended up by, I think, in my mind, a very different kind of an automation, which is not really technology automation, but natural systems, sort of self-regulating mechanisms that can come in. And last 4 years, I think our understanding is they are far more mature, extremely resilient systems that exist in nature that can self-regulate themselves.
I think at least, uh, I mean, maybe being young or whatever, my questions are now gearing towards HFT. What strategies what strategies worked for you, if you can share for our listeners?
You mean in HFT space itself?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think we were primarily involved in options market making at that point.
Mm.
Both, and we used to trade in equity and currency derivatives also. Currency derivatives was more or less a very arbitrage centric strategies, but on the equity options side, we were doing market making at that.
Okay. So basically selling put options.
The entire option chain we used to market make, not just only puts or only calls or it was the entire option chain that we would make the market for.
Oh,
So we would be
interesting.
on
So,
both sides of most of the market.
so how will you make money then?
So there is a very large likelihood that whether you buy or you sell, you're probably buying from or selling to us. So you're always on both sides, and you're making that spread in between.
Got it. Got it. I think that will require another episode. You have intrigued me with HFT. But all right, all right. That's good stuff. So now then, Sunit, what? So are there, I can sense you, slow lifestyle is your thing. So do you plan to expand, or you're happy with the current pace?
No, I mean, we actually plan. We are somewhere around our collective span about, I think, around 1,000 acres today, roughly. Our goal is over the next decade, we want to create 10,000 acres of these prototypes in different geographies. So we started in the extreme south, which is Coorg. Then now we have come as far as central India, which is Bhopal is our northernmost collective. I want to keep going up like that so that the different geographies have their prototypes. And then post that, we would go into the whole idea of managed estates as well, which is managing our neighbors, taking on large landscapes at that level and not individual farms.
Understood.
Yeah.
Awesome. 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 That's
So, I
pretty
mean,
amazing. I mean,
I mean, just yeah, about the pace itself, I don't think we have targets of pace as such that every year we have to grow 20% or 30%. But on a broad level, we want to do these 10,000 acres in the next 10 years.
And do you like this business more than it?
It's definitely more, what do you call, very, very soul satisfying. I'm a big travel enthusiast, so I'm one of those lucky few people who can say that my work actually takes me to the most exotic of locations. So it's mostly I'm on vacation when I'm on work. So it's
That's
so
the statement everybody wants to say.
so that's really good to have. But yeah, I mean, yes, and some level, obviously, the pace of life you do crave for it sometimes. Where I mean, you've lived a decade in an extremely fast-paced environment, extremely intellectually charged environment. The switch is not easy to make. There was every likelihood that I'll get bored with it, with the switch itself, but it so turns out that this is actually more pleasurable than that.
If someone comes to you for mentorance and guidance to help that person set up HFT, are you up for it?
And this has happened multiple times. No, I'm not actually. I've taken that conscious call, so I'm not. But if I really, I mean, I'm still, in that sense, I'm still a shareholder in my older company as well. So I have that option of going back, provided my other co-founders also agree and all of that. But it's never occurred to me.
Understood. Awesome. Amazing, Sunit. It was such a pleasure to have you and such a refreshing business you have, and really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much for your time. Anything you want to share?
Yeah, I mean, I would definitely ask all your listeners to check us out, visit our collectives. There's an alternate way of life as well, not just to buy into our collectives or anything, just to open up those horizons for them.
Amazing. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
your time.